Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission today is, well, it's arguably the most ambitious we've ever taken on.
Oh, definitely.
Because we are diving into the oldest surviving piece of world literature, a text that has been with us in one form or another for nearly 4,000 years.
We are talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Exactly.
And we're really aiming to tell the whole story today, covering all its aspects. Because this isn't just, a literature class discussion.
Not at all.
It's more like a forensic investigation. We're looking at a historical artifact, a genuine archaeological puzzle, and a profoundly influential philosophical text. A text that, frankly, completely redefined how the modern West understood its own history and religion when it was rediscovered.
And that's the core of this deep dive, isn't it? Our goal is to trace that complete narrative. We start with the chaotic, dusty discovery of these tens of thousands of fragmented clay tablets back in the 19th century.
Right, in Mesopotamia.
And we follow it right up to the themes that still hit home today. Themes about what it means to be human, friendship, power, and that universal terror of inevitable death.
To really get it, you almost have to mentally transport yourself back to the mid-19th century. Picture this.
Yeah.
You're in the ruins of Nineveh, the great Assyrian capital. It's desolate.
Near modern Mosul, right?
Exactly. And excavators are literally digging up tens of thousands of broken clay fragments. They're covered in this wedge-shaped script, cuneiform. They probably just look like shattered pottery to most people.
That image is just incredible to me. You're holding what feels like literal dust, maybe bits of breaking pot, but inside that dust is a history, a whole narrative that's older than almost every foundational story we tell ourselves in the West.
And written in a script that had been dead for thousands of years.
Yeah, and found in pieces, just fragments.
Exactly. And that physical state is so crucial. The epic we read today is not like finding a neat manuscript rolled up somewhere. It's what scholars call a modern scholarly puzzle. It's been painstakingly pieced together over, 170 years now?
Wow.
By generations of dedicated Assyriologists. The fact that the text we have is full of gaps, these lacunae, and sometimes even has contradictory bits because of the fragmentation.
And the sources getting mixed up during the dig?
Precisely. Plus the damage from just time. That physical reality is fundamental. You have to appreciate that to understand the poem. It's as much a historical document, an artifact, as it is a literary masterpiece.
So our mission is ambitious. We want to get into its history, the specific moments of rediscovery, trace the editorial genius that shaped it into its final form.
The structure, too.
Right, dissect its narrative structure, which is fascinatingly symmetrical, analyze the characters and their philosophical roles.
And most importantly, maybe, extract that hard-earned wisdom it offers, that wisdom about mortality, about legacy.
It's quite a journey.
Let's dive in.
Okay, so our modern part of the story, it doesn't start in ancient Uruk, obviously. It starts almost 4,000 years later. We're talking the 1840s.
Right, with the first major European excavations happening in Mesopotamia, specifically at that site we mentioned, Nineveh.
Near modern Mosul in Iraq.
And this location is key because that's where the standardized, the sort of final version of the epic was actually found. The fragments came from the really famous royal library of Ashurbanipal.
Ashurbanipal. He reigned in the 7th century BCE.
That's right. He was the last truly great king of the Assyrian Empire. The initial discoveries there were made by Austin Henry Layard, and then later by his assistant, Hormuzd Rassam.
And what's immediately striking, you mentioned this earlier, is the incredible historical irony of how these tablets even survived.
It's amazing, isn't it?
The very thing that destroyed the Assyrian Empire, the invaders burning the capital down around 612 BCE, that fire is what saved the epic for us.
That is such a crucial point. The intense heat from that massive fire, it essentially fired the clay tablets. It baked them hard.
Like putting them in a kiln.
Exactly like a kiln. If they hadn't been fired, they would have just stayed as unfired clay. And eventually, with moisture and time, they would have just crumbled back into dust. Gone.
So that accidental baking preserved them, making them, as the sources say, among the best preserved documents from that whole era.
Thousands of years of Mesopotamian history, yeah. Destruction, ironically, led directly to preservation. It's incredible.
But the actual process of digging them up, it sounds like it was anything but careful and scholarly. The digs were chaotic.
Oh, absolutely chaotic. We sometimes have this romantic image of early archaeology, right? Indiana Jones style.
Yeah.
But the reality, especially back then, was often messy. It was more focused on just getting stuff, quantity, rather than meticulous recording. Hormuzd Rassam, for instance, apparently made no record of the findings while he was digging.
Oh, wow. So they just pulled them out.
Pretty much. So when these tens of thousands of tablets and fragments were shipped back to the British Museum in London, pieces from different dig sites, different time periods, totally different kinds of texts, royal decrees, omen lists, epics, they were all just irreparably mixed.
So you might have a piece of Gilgamesh next to you, like a shopping list.
Potentially, yeah.
Right.
Or a treaty fragment. It created this enormous decades-long puzzle for the decipherers back in Europe. Just figuring out which piece belonged to which text was a monumental task.
I can't even imagine the scale of that work. Okay, so let's fast forward. We're in London. It's 1872. This is the moment when this academic puzzle becomes a massive cultural earthquake in the West.
Yes, 1872. Entered George Smith. He actually started at the British Museum doing something completely different, engraving and repairing banknotes.
No way.
Yeah. But he was fascinated by the inscriptions and taught himself cuneiform in his spare time. He became this brilliant, self-taught Assyriologist. And he was painstakingly working through these jumbled fragments from Nineveh, focusing on anything that looked like creation or mythology texts.
And he finds one specific fragment, K3375.
That's the one. It was part of a larger tablet, Tablet XY of the Epic as we now know it, detailing part of Gilgamesh's quest. Smith managed to decipher it, and what he read was, well, it was astonishingly familiar yet incredibly ancient. It just stunned him.
It was the flood story.
A detailed description of a great flood, a cataclysm meant to wipe out humanity.
This immediately gets labeled the flood tablet. What were the details that caused such a shockwave? Why was it so explosive?
Well, Smith read about a god secretly warning a chosen hero, a man named Utnapishtim. He's told to build a massive boat, this huge cube-like vessel.
A cube, not an arc shape.
A cube, yeah. The text is specific. And he's told to load his family and all living things onto it. It describes this catastrophic flood lasting 7 days.
Yeah.
The boat eventually landing on a mountain, Mount Nimish.
And then sending out birds.
Exactly. Sending out 3 birds in sequence, a dove, then a swallow, then a raven to see if the floodwaters had gone down.
The parallels to the Genesis story of Noah were just impossible to ignore, almost word for word in places.
Shockingly close. Smith presented his findings to the Society of Biblical Archaeology, and the reaction was immediate and intense. You have to remember the context. Victorian England in 1872 was already wrestling with Darwin's theories, with early forms of biblical criticism questioning the literal truth of Scripture.
Right. Science and historical analysis were already challenging traditional beliefs.
And then, bam, here comes actual physical evidence, clay tablets dug out of the ground. And they seem to prove that a core part of the Bible, the Genesis flood story, wasn't unique. It wasn't some singular divinely revealed event.
It was a version of a much older story.
It was clearly an iteration of a much older and widespread Mesopotamian literary tradition. It was a theological bombshell. It hit Victorian society like a shockwave.
It forced a complete rethinking of history, didn't it? It meant the earliest parts of the Bible weren't necessarily appearing out of thin air. They were part of a larger cultural conversation.
Crafted versions, perhaps, of narratives that were already ancient when the Bible was being written down. It forced this radical recontextualization of texts that were seen as the bedrock of Western civilization and religion. It fundamentally challenged that sense of cultural and religious exceptionalism. It basically said, look, this story belongs to the whole region, not just to you.
And George Smith, the guy who learned cuneiform on his own.
He became an instant global celebrity. He was the first person to read the Epic of Gilgamesh in 2,500 years.
Yeah.
Sadly, he died just 4 years later, out in the field looking for more fragments. But the damage, or rather the revelation, was done. The epic's place in world history was cemented right then and there.
It's just amazing to think that the modern story of this text is only about 150 years old, but the text itself has this incredible history stretching back, well, over 1,500 years of evolution before it even got buried.
That long process of evolution is key. It didn't just appear fully formed. We see it develop. It goes from Gilgamesh being, maybe a powerful local king to stories about him existing as separate adventure tales. And then finally, someone shapes it into this unified epic that asks really big existential questions.
So let's start with the man himself, Gilgamesh. He was actually a real person, a historical king.
Oh yeah, the consensus is strong on that. The hero is almost certainly based on a historical king named Gilgamesh, or Bilgams in the earlier Sumerian language. He ruled the city-state of Uruk, probably around 2700 BC.
So really early, dawn of recorded history stuff.
Absolutely. And his main claim to fame, historically speaking,
The walls.
the walls. Archaeology backs up the tradition that he was the king who raised its walls. He built that massive 6-mile defensive perimeter around Uruk, and that act of building, that lasting physical legacy, is something the poem circles back to right at the very end. It's crucial.
But he didn't stay just human in people's minds for long. The myth-making process started pretty quickly.
Very quickly, he gets mythologized as the son of a human king, Lugobanda, but also the wise cow goddess Ninsen.
So that makes him 2/3 god, 1/3 human.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which immediately elevates his status, explains his superhuman strength, and maybe his difficult personality. By the mid-3rd millennium BC, so just a few centuries after he likely lived, he was already considered deified.
And his name became politically useful.
Hugely. Centuries later, powerful rulers like King Shulgi of Ur around the 21st century BCE actually claimed Gilgamesh as a divine brother. It was a way to legitimize their own reigns, linking themselves to this legendary godlike figure. He was the established prototype of the supreme king. His adventures were probably already being sung in courts long before the epic we know took shape.
So those adventures first appeared as separate stories, the early Sumerian tales.
Correct. We found fragments of 5 independent poems written in Sumerian, dating from around 2100 BCE. These were likely copied in scribal schools, maybe used for practice. They were basically standalone adventure stories.
Like Gilgamesh and Huwawa, the forest monster.
That's one, yeah. And Gilgamesh and the Bull of Heaven. Great stories on their own, but they didn't have that connecting thread, that overarching narrative arc or philosophical depth yet.
And there's a really crucial difference in those early tales concerning Enkidu, right? That changes everything later on.
Absolutely, the fundamental difference. In those early Sumerian poems, Enkidu is basically just Gilgamesh's servant, sometimes translated as companion, but clearly subordinate. He's loyal, he helps out, but he's not the equal partner, the sort of mirror image, the soulmate that he becomes later.
That shift seems key.
It unlocks everything, making Enkidu into Gilgamesh's double, his wild counterpart who becomes civilized, his best friend whose death shatters him. That's what gives the later standard Babylonian version its incredible psychological depth and its tragic power. Without that equal relationship, the story just doesn't work the same way.
So these separate Sumerian tales, they become the source material for a combined epic, now written in Akkadian, the language that replaced Sumerian. And this happens in stages.
Yeah, 2 main stages we know of. First, there's the Old Babylonian version, or OB version. This dates to around the 18th century BCE. It's the first real attempt we see to weave the stories into a single, longer epic.
But we only have fragments of that one.
Highly fragmentary, yeah.
Yeah.
We know it mostly by its opening line. It's incipit, which was Shutur Elishari,
Which means?
surpassing all other kings. And that title tells you exactly what the focus of that older version was. Heroic achievement, glory, being the best king ever. Very external.
Okay, which brings us finally to the version that survived most completely. The one found in Ashurbanipal's library, the Standard Babylonian, or SB version.
That's the canonical 12-tablet version. It dates from roughly 1300 to 1000 BCE. And remarkably, tradition actually gives us the name of the person credited with fixing its final form.
Sinlaki Uneni.
Sinulaki Wane. He's often called an editor-poet, a master scholar and scribe of his time. And his work wasn't just copying, it was a profound act of literary creation, of giving the epic its ultimate shape and philosophical direction.
How did he do that? What was his editorial genius? How did he remodel the poem?
Well, think of him as a master weaver. First, he added a completely new prologue. This prologue immediately sets a different tone. It's reflective. It asks the reader to consider Gilgamesh's whole journey, his suffering, his wisdom, and to look at the great walls of Uruk. It frames the story philosophically right from the start.
Okay.
Second, he skillfully wove those previously separate adventures, Humbaba, the Bull of Heaven, etc., into a single, unified, linear narrative. He created a flow, cause, and effect. But his most brilliant move, arguably, was to recast the story, to emphasize the theme of wisdom gained through suffering.
And that reframing is crystal clear just by comparing the titles, isn't it?
Absolutely stark. The Old Babylonian title was Surpassing All Other Kings, all about external heroic achievement.
Right.
The Standard Babylonian version's incipit is Shanakba Umuru.
Which means he who saw the deep.
He who saw the deep, or sometimes he who sees the unknown. That pivot is everything. It shifts the focus entirely. It's no longer just about being a great warrior or king. It's about the Nakbu, the deep. This could mean hidden knowledge, profound understanding, the mysteries of life and death. It refers to the wisdom Gilgamesh gained through his journey, especially through his suffering and confrontation with mortality.
So Sinlaki Uneni took adventure stories.
And turned them into a unified, cyclical, philosophical tragedy. He transformed Gilgamesh from just a famous hero into essentially a guide for how a wise person must eventually accept their mortal limits. That's the genius of the epic's final form. He gave it its lasting depth.
Okay, let's walk through that narrative arc Sinlucky and Ini crafted. Following Gilgamesh's journey really is a journey, isn't it? Through hubris, tragedy, and then finally some kind of reconciliation.
It really is. And the structure he created is remarkable, almost perfectly balanced,
Yeah.
which really highlights the skill involved. It starts with this king who has unchecked power and ends with him having gained self-awareness.
So, part 1. Hubris and tempering. That's tablets 1 and 2. We meet Gilgamesh, this two-thirds god figure. He's magnificent, powerful, but also a tyrannical ruler.
Totally tyrannical. He's using his immense power arbitrarily, oppressing his own people in Uruk. The most infamous example is his abuse of the droit de seigneur, the supposed right to sleep with brides on their wedding night before their husbands.
Which obviously causes huge resentment.
Immense suffering and resentment. The people cry out to the gods. He's incredible, yes, but completely oblivious to his own limitations, his own mortality, his own failings. So in response, the gods create Enkidu,
The wild man.
the wild man, created specifically as Gilgamesh's rival, his equal in strength, a potential counterweight to his arrogance.
And Enkidu starts out literally wild, living with animals in the wilderness. His transformation, his civilizing, begins with Shamhat.
Right, Shamhat, the temple prostitute, or perhaps more accurately, a priestess devoted to Ishtar. She's sent out to basically tame him. Their encounter is described over 6 days and 7 nights. It's quite intense.
And the immediate result is...
The animals reject him. They flee him. He's lost that primal connection to nature. He still has great strength, but the text says he now has wisdom, and the thoughts of a man were in his heart. He gains consciousness, awareness, maybe the first inkling of mortality, which his purely animal self lacked. He's been changed.
So Enkidu then goes to Uruk, confronts Gilgamesh right as he's about to abuse another bride. They have this massive wrestling match.
An epic fight. Gilgamesh wins, but only just. And the result isn't hatred or death, it's the opposite.
They become best friends, inseparable.
The deepest possible bond. Gilgamesh, maybe for the first time ever, finds someone who is truly his equal, a mirror to himself, and that relationship immediately has an effect. It tempers his tyranny, his restless energy, his aggression gets redirected outwards, away from his own people.
Which takes us straight into part 2, the quest for fame. Tablets 3 through 6. That redirection of energy is key here.
Exactly. Their friendship is cemented. Uruk is maybe too peaceful for them. They get restless, feel lazy. So Gilgamesh proposes this huge adventure. Let's go to the distant cedar forest, kill its terrifying guardian, the monster Humbaba, and win everlasting fame and renown.
So the goal here is explicitly external glory, making a name for themselves.
Absolutely. It's about building a reputation that will outlive them. Securing a legacy through heroic deeds, it's still tied to that idea of surpassing all others.
But the journey itself is filled with danger signs. Gilgamesh keeps having these terrifying dreams.
5 terrifying dreams, yeah. Mountains collapsing, bulls attacking him. Really ominous stuff. But Enkidu, who's now the civilized one, maybe ironically, acts as the dream interpreter.
And he tells Gilgamesh they're all good signs.
He twists every single one into a positive omen. He says the collapsing mountain is Humbaba falling before them. The bull is divine aid. It shows their incredible joint ambition, their maybe blind confidence, their shared hubris pushing them forward regardless of the warnings.
Okay, so they get to the forest, they confront Humbaba. The moment they actually kill him seems important, morally complex.
It is. Because Gilgamesh hesitates. He actually pities Humbaba when the monster pleads for his life. It's a flicker of empathy, something we didn't see in the tyrant from Tablet 1.
But Enkidu pushes him.
Enkidu urges him to finish the job quickly. He says, "Don't show mercy, think of your reputation. The gods might get angry if you let him live." So Gilgamesh strikes the killing blow, and as Humbaba dies, he unleashes this terrible curse.
Aimed directly at Enkidu.
Explicitly at Enkidu, not Gilgamesh, foreshadowing whose life will be forfeit.
Their shared hubris then reaches its absolute peak in Tablet 6, doesn't it, with the goddess Ishtar?
Oh, absolutely. Ishtar, the powerful, capricious goddess of love and war, sees the heroic Gilgamesh all cleaned up after the battle, and she wants him. She makes these amorous advances.
And Gilgamesh doesn't just say no.
He doesn't just reject her. He insults her viciously. He lists all her previous mortal lovers and how she destroyed every single one of them. He calls her a defective pot, a shoe that bites its owner's foot. Just brutal.
Understandably, she's enraged.
Furious. She goes straight to her father, Anu, the king of the gods, and demands vengeance. She gets him to unleash the monstrous bull of heaven down on Uruk.
But the two friends manage to kill the bull too.
They do, another incredible feat. But then comes the ultimate act of defiance, of pure arrogance. Enkidu tears off one of the bull's hindquarters.
He throws it at Ishtar.
Throws it right in the goddess's face, taunting her. It's basically challenging the gods themselves.
Yeah.
They've gone too far.
That is clearly the tipping point, which leads directly to the tragic reversal in tablets 7 and 8.
The consequences come swiftly. The gods hold council. Enlil, the same god who appointed Humbaba, is furious. They decide someone has to pay for killing Humbaba and the Bull of Heaven, and for disrespecting Ishtar.
They can't kill Gilgamesh because he's part god.
So they decree vengeance on Enkidu. The mortal friend must pay the price for their shared actions. Enkidu falls ill with this mysterious wasting sickness.
And just before he dies, he has this terrifying dream about the afterlife.
Yes, and this is so important for understanding Gilgamesh's later reaction. Enkidu dreams he's taken to the underworld, the Mesopotamian land of the dead. It's described as the house of dust.
Grim.
Incredibly grim. The dead sit in darkness, they're clothed like birds with feathers, they eat clay and dust. There's no light, no joy, no comfort, no reward. It's just bleak, dusty, and desolate. Utterly terrifying. And this vision seals Gilgamesh's fate, in a way, because now he knows what awaits him too.
Enkidu dies, and Gilgamesh's reaction isn't just sadness, it's complete devastation.
He is utterly shattered. He roars like a lioness, tears out his hair, rips off his fine clothes, and most tellingly, he refuses to allow Enkidu's body to be buried for 6 days and 7 nights. He just watches it, hoping for some sign of life, maybe a maggot falling from the nose is the final straw. It's the first time he truly, viscerally confronts mortality. Not as an idea, but as the cold, horrific reality of losing the person who completed him. His entire world, his understanding of himself, is destroyed.
Which launches him directly into Part 3, the quest for immortality, tablets 9x through 11.
Yeah.
This is driven purely by panic, isn't it?
Pure existential terror. Gilgamesh, haunted by Enkidu's decay and that nightmare vision of the House of Dust, cannot face his own inevitable end. He abandons his kingdom, his responsibilities, everything. He's no longer the glorious king. He's described as wandering the wilderness, wearing animal skins, looking gaunt and grief-stricken.
His goal now is singular.
Find Utnapishtim, the man the gods called the Faroe, the only human who survived the Great Flood and was granted immortality. Gilgamesh thinks Utnapishtim must have the secret, the key to escaping death. He undertakes this perilous journey across deadly waters, past the terrifying scorpion beings who guard the path of the sun at the edge of the world.
On this journey, he meets the innkeeper, Siduri. She offers him some crucial advice.
Yes, Siduri, the wise alewife who lives by the edge of the cosmic sea. She sees this distraught, wild-looking man and basically tells him to stop, to give up the quest. She says death is the god's decree for humans. You can't avoid it.
She gives him the famous Carpe Diem speech.
Exactly. The first clear statement of the epic's eventual wisdom. She tells him, Gilgamesh, fill your belly. Day, night, make merry. Let your clothes be clean, wash your head, bathe. Look at the child holding your hand. Let your wife delight in your embrace, for this is the task of mankind.
Find joy in ordinary human life.
Find meaning in the present, in simple, tangible pleasures. Love, family, food, music. It's a remarkably humanistic, almost secular piece of advice in this mythic context. But Gilgamesh is too consumed by fear and grief. He rejects her wisdom and presses on.
So, in Talisari, he finally crosses the waters of death with the help of the boatman Urshanabi and meets Utnapishtim, who is brutally honest with him.
Utnapishtim basically confirms everything Siduri said, but with crushing finality. He tells Gilgamesh straight up, life, which you look for, you will never find. He recounts the flood story, emphasizing it was a unique event, his immortality a one-off gift. And then, almost cruelly, he gives Gilgamesh a test.
The sleep test.
Say wait for 6 days and 7 nights. If you can conquer sleep, maybe you can conquer death.
And Gilgamesh
fails immediately. He sits down and instantly falls asleep for 7 days. Sleep, the little death, proves too strong for him.
Why include that specific failure? It seems almost designed to humiliate him.
I think Sinlaki Unini included it precisely for its philosophical weight. Sleep is the most basic human need, a symbol of our mortal frailty. If Gilgamesh can't even conquer his need for rest, how can he possibly hope to conquer the ultimate limitation, death itself? It proves he's fundamentally human, fundamentally mortal. Utnapishtim even has his wife bake a loaf of bread for each day Gilgamesh sleeps, showing the passage of time and the bread getting progressively stale and moldy. It's undeniable proof of his failure.
But Utnapishtim's wife feels sorry for him. There's one last chance.
Yes, she persuades her husband to give Gilgamesh a parting gift. She reveals the existence of a magical plant growing at the bottom of the ocean. It doesn't grant immortality, but it restores youth. It makes an old man young again.
So Gilgamesh dives down, finds the plant. He has it.
He has it. And his plan isn't even selfish anymore. He decides to take it back to Uruk, test it on an old man there first, and then share it with all the elders, maybe restore the city's vitality. It seems like a partial victory, a way to bring something back. But on the journey home, he stops to bathe in a cool pool of water. He leaves the plant on the bank. And a snake smells its fragrance, slithers up, eats the plant, and immediately sheds its skin, becoming young again.
Oh, the ultimate irony. The snake gets the rejuvenation.
The failure is absolute, total, and deeply ironic. Nature itself steals the secret to defying time. Gilgamesh is left with nothing. He sits down and weeps.
He returns to Uruk, empty-handed but reconciled at last to his mortality. He's been forced to accept his limits.
And that failure is what makes the structure so perfect. As you said, tablets I through Isai form this beautiful symmetrical pattern, a chiasmus.
Quest for fame with Enkidu.
Succeeds but leads to hubris.
Tragic reversal, Enkidu's death.
The turning point.
Quest for immortality alone.
Utterly fails. The symmetry perfectly mirrors his internal transformation, from seeking external glory to finally accepting internal mortal reality.
We should briefly mention Tablet 12, though. It feels tacked on, breaking that perfect symmetry.
It is generally considered an appendage, yeah. It's likely a separate, older Sumerian story about Enkidu's spirit being summoned from the underworld. It doesn't really fit the narrative flow of the first 11 tablets.
But its content reinforces the main theme.
Absolutely. Enkidu gives this incredibly grim report on the underworld, detailing the miserable conditions there even more explicitly than his earlier dream. So, while it breaks the narrative symmetry, its inclusion at the very end serves to hammer home why Gilgamesh was so terrified of death and why accepting mortality is such a profound achievement. It underscores the bleakness of the alternative he was trying so desperately to escape.
The characters in Gilgamesh are just amazing, especially for such an ancient text. They're not just flat archetypes doing things. They feel like, well, like philosophical agents. Each one seems designed to push Gilgamesh towards his transformation. Let's start with the man himself.
Gilgamesh's arc really is the whole point of the epic, isn't it? He starts as this tyrannical ruler, hated by his people, incredibly powerful but lacking wisdom. And he ends up, we assume, as a wise king.
The great paradox is that he's two-thirds divine, superior to everyone, yet he's completely lost until he meets his fully mortal friend, Enkidu.
Right. That friendship transforms him for the better, channels his energy. But it's Enkidu's death that's the real catalyst for the profound change, the journey of self-discovery.
It shatters his whole view of himself, his place in the world.
Completely. Before Enkidu died, Gilgamesh acted as if his divine heritage made him invincible, somehow exempt from the rules. Enkidu's death is the brutal proof that it doesn't. His one-third humanity, his mortality, is inescapable. The whole quest for immortality is really an attempt to deny that human part of himself.
So he fails in the quest itself.
But succeeds in gaining something far more valuable: wisdom. He comes back reconciled to his mortality, understanding that true power, true immortality, isn't about cheating death. It's about what you build, what you leave behind, that lasting legacy for his city, the city he'd abandoned in his panic.
Okay, now Enkidu. His journey is almost the exact opposite of Gilgamesh's.
It's the inverse arc, yeah. From a wild man to a civilized being. He starts as this pure elemental creature living in total harmony with nature, representing this kind of primal freedom. But that freedom doesn't last.
What's the price he pays for becoming civilized?
It's steep. First, that physical loss, the animals reject him. He loses some of that primal strength and freedom after his encounter with Shamhat. But more profoundly, he gains the terrifying awareness of human limitation, of mortality.
He becomes Gilgamesh's moral compass in some ways.
Yes, he guides Gilgamesh, provides companionship, but he also gains the knowledge that ultimately leads to his own death, because being civilized brings him into conflict with the gods. His death is tragic, definitely, but it serves that crucial philosophical function. It's the necessary sacrifice to force the king's transformation.
I really want to focus on the female characters for a moment. They seem consistently pivotal. They are the catalysts driving the plot at almost every major turn, often contrasting with the more straightforward male adventures.
They absolutely are the hinge points. You start with Shamhat, the temple prostitute, the sacred priestess. She is explicitly the agent of civilization. The epic connects her sexuality directly with bringing Enkidu into the world of human thought and society. She humanizes him, literally lifts him out of raw nature.
But there's ambiguity there, isn't there? When Enkidu is dying, he furiously curses her at first.
He does. He blames her in his agony and regret. He feels she seduced him out of his safe, ignorant wilderness state and into this world of suffering and death.
But then he takes the curse back.
Yes. The sun god Shamash intervenes. He reminds Enkidu that Shamhat didn't just bring him mortality. She brought him clothing, food, civilization, and most importantly, the greatest gift he ever knew, his friendship with Gilgamesh, the wisdom to appreciate that bond. And Enkidu immediately retracts the curse. It's his profound moment of acceptance, acknowledging that civilization, despite its costs, brought him meaning and love.
Then you have Ishtar, the goddess of love, but here she functions as the agent of tragedy.
Completely. Her wounded pride, her vanity after Gilgamesh's brutal rejection sets the whole disaster in motion. Their repudiation of her killing her bull, throwing its leg at her, that's the offense that demands divine retribution. She is the direct cause of Enkidu's death sentence. Without her fury, Gilgamesh might never have faced his existential crisis.
And contrasting Ishtar's destructive passion, we have Siduri, the calm voice of practical wisdom.
Siduri the Alewife, yeah. She's the antithesis of Ishtar's chaos. She represents balance, reason. She lives peacefully at the edge of the world, and she's the first character to articulate the epic's ultimate conclusion. Stop chasing the impossible. Embrace life.
The carpe diem philosophy.
Find meaning in the simple, everyday mortal joys. Food, family, love, pleasure. This is the task of mankind. She offers him the attainable solution, the path to peace, but Gilgamesh, in his panic, just can't hear it yet.
We should also mention Gilgamesh's mother, Ninsun, the goddess who sort of blesses the friendship.
Ninsun is key because she provides divine sanction for the bond. Before they leave for the cedar forest, she performs a ritual, formally adopts Enkidu as her son. This elevates their friendship beyond just a human connection. It becomes a sacred covenant, divinely endorsed. She seals their bond.
And finally, Utnapishtim's wife. She's unnamed, but plays a crucial role.
She's the quiet helper, isn't she? While her husband, Utnapishtim, is being rather harsh and dismissive towards Gilgamesh,
Almost mocking him.
yeah, making fun of him for falling asleep, his wife is more helpful and generous. It's her compassion, her intervention, that convinces Utnapishtim to reveal the secret of the plant of youth. She represents a moment of mercy, a final, albeit ultimately futile, helping hand in a world full of harsh truths.
Let's go back to Utnapishtim himself. He's the goal of the whole quest, but he turns out to be, well, kind of an anticlimax. He doesn't actually have any secret wisdom. Why is he there?
I think he embodies the futility of Gilgamesh's specific quest, the quest for a secret trick to beat death. Gilgamesh expects to find a wise sage, a guru, who earned immortality through enlightenment. Instead, he finds this incredibly old man who basically just got lucky.
He didn't earn it.
No. He possesses no secret wisdom to share because he didn't achieve immortality through virtue or effort. He was just given it as a unique, unrepeatable recompense from the gods after they caused the flood. It was a special circumstance, never to be repeated.
And his attitude towards Gilgamesh reinforces that, his disdain.
Absolutely. His making fun of Gilgamesh for failing the simple sleep test just hammers home the point. You are mortal, I am the exception, don't even try. By making Utnapishtim somewhat unsympathetic, even dismissive, the epic forces the reader, and Gilgamesh, to focus not on the secret he failed to get, but on the lesson he absolutely must learn about acceptance.
And finally, the gods themselves, the whole Mesopotamian pantheon. They drive the plot, but they are so different from, say, the God of the Hebrew Bible.
Oh, vastly different. They are terrifyingly human, in a way. The sources describe them as capricious, impulsive, selfish, and heavily personified. They argue, they panic during the flood, they get hungry, they hold grudges.
They're not all knowing or all powerful in the same way.
No. And they have split loyalties. You have gods like Ea, the god of wisdom and water, and Shamash, the sun god. They act as steadfast friends of humanity, often warning or helping humans like Utnapishtim or Enkidu.
But then you have Enlil. He seems like the main antagonist among the gods.
Enlil, the god of wind and storm, often represents that arbitrary, hostile aspect of divine power. He's the one who gets annoyed by human noise and sends the flood. He's the one who appointed Humbaba. He seems to resent humanity's existence. The gods in Gilgamesh are a powerful, dangerous force you have to navigate, but they're driven by very recognizable, often flawed emotions.
The reason this epic still resonates so powerfully, I think, is because it tackles these huge, universal philosophical questions about living and dying. We've touched on them, But let's focus on three core themes. First, the one that really drives the whole story. That incredible bond between Gilgamesh and Enkidu.
That friendship, or love, it's not just a subplot.
Mhm.
It's arguably the most important love in the epic. It's the engine that transforms both men. The big adventures killing Humbaba, the bull, they're almost just expressions of that bond. The real plot is the creation, the intensity, and then the tragic loss of that relationship.
And the text isn't shy about describing their intimacy, is it? That's certainly something modern readers pick up on.
Not at all. The language is remarkably explicit for its time. The sources mention Gilgamesh declaring he will love him like a woman, or that the two were destined to love each other like man and wife. They frequently kiss and embrace. This relationship gives Gilgamesh a sense of purpose and connection he never found just being king.
Which is why it's been embraced in discussions of deep male friendship, and even in queer readings.
Exactly. It celebrates this incredibly intense, life-changing bond that fundamentally redefines both men. And the loss of that bond is what triggers everything else.
Which leads directly to the second major theme, maybe the most obvious one. The terror of death, and that desperate quest for immortality it sparks.
Mortality is the absolute central meditation of the text. Gilgamesh's panic isn't just philosophical, it's visceral. It's driven by that terrifying Mesopotamian view of the afterlife, that grim and desolate house of dust. There's no heaven, no reward waiting, just bleakness.
So Enkidu's death isn't just loss, it's a preview of Gilgamesh's own horrifying future.
Precisely. It forces him out of his denial. The quest becomes this frantic attempt to find any escape route from that fate.
But as we saw, the epic systematically shuts down every possibility of escape. The quest is doomed from the start.
It really is a journey of confirmation, not discovery. Every stage, every person he meets, Siduri and Napishtim, even the snake, reinforces the same hard truth, the original divine decree. When the gods created man, they let death be his share. His failure is total and complete, from the small failure of the sleep test symbolizing his human weakness to the huge failure of losing the plant. There is no loophole.
So if physical immortality is off the table, the lesson has to be about how you live the life you do have.
Exactly. The epic performs this amazing shift. It starts seeming like it's about death, but it ends up being profoundly about life. Gilgamesh has to change his definition of immortality. He comes back to Uruk without eternal life, but with wisdom.
The wisdom is.
The true mortality lies in leaving a lasting legacy. Not through your body, but through your actions, your contributions. For him, it's his contributions to his city, symbolized by the Great Walls. He can't live forever, but what humankind builds, what culture creates, that can endure. His role is to contribute to that enduring legacy.
That connects beautifully to the third big theme, which is woven through Enkidu's story especially, this tension between civilization and nature, the price of knowing.
It's a really sophisticated juxtaposition. You have Gilgamesh, the ultimate product of civilization, the king, and Enkidu starts as the embodiment of pure nature, the wild man. Enkidu's transformation via Shahat is presented as a necessary fall from nature.
Necessary but costly.
Very costly. He gains knowledge, companionship, culture, but he loses that primal innocence, that connection to the wild. And crucially, he gains the awareness of his own mortality.
Civilization gives them the power to conquer external nature, like the monster Humbaba, the bull of heaven.
They can subdue the wilderness outside. But Enkidu's death is the brutal reminder that civilization cannot conquer the wilderness within our own mortality. Nature, in the form of death, always wins. One source points out that a purely wild human animal probably doesn't have a concept of death. It's civilization, consciousness, self-awareness that brings that terrifying knowledge.
Which explains why Enkidu, in his dying rage, initially curses Shamhat. He blames civilization itself for his fate.
He sees a direct line.
Yeah.
She civilized him, which led him to Gilgamesh, which led him to fight monsters, which led him to offend the gods, which led to his death. It seems logical in his pain.
But the retraction of that curse is so powerful. It's the final word on the value of being human, despite the cost.
It's the ultimate acceptance. He takes back the curse when Shamash reminds him that civilization also brought him the highest peak of existence he knew. His friendship with Gilgamesh, the capacity for love, for loyalty, for meaning. The epic seems to conclude that civilization, this knowing, is a necessary step, maybe. It brings suffering and the awareness of death, but it also brings the possibility of profound connection and lasting achievement. It can't beat death, but it offers the only tools we have to create meaning in the face of it, like building walls or, indeed, telling stories.
We absolutely have to circle back properly to Tablet Ateftim's story. Because, as you said, this single part of the epic had the most dramatic, the most immediate cultural impact when George Smith deciphered it back in 1872.
It's the narrative centerpiece in many ways, and definitely the most consequential piece that was borrowed or interpolated into the Gilgamesh story.
So just remind us of the key details of the flood story as Anapishtim tells it to Gilgamesh.
Okay. Anapishtim explains that the gods, led by the stormy Enlil, decided for reasons Anapishtim doesn't state in this version, to destroy humanity with a flood. But Ea, the god of wisdom, who's often friendly to humans, felt this was wrong.
But he couldn't directly warn Anapishtim because the gods had sworn an oath of secrecy?
Exactly. So Ea uses this clever loophole. He speaks to the reed wall of Anapishtim's house, knowing Anapishtim is inside and will overhear. He warns the wall, telling it to tear itself down and build a boat.
A giant cube boat.
A huge cube, yeah. Load it with his family, craftsmen, animals, the seed of all living things. When Anapishtim does this, the flood comes, a terrible storm for 6 days and 7 nights. Finally, the boat lodges on the peak of Mount Nimash.
And then the birds.
He sends out a dove. It comes back.
Yeah.
Sends out a swallow. It comes back. Sends out a raven. It finds land, eats, circles, and doesn't return. The waters have receded.
And the reaction of the gods when he gets off the boat and makes a sacrifice.
That's that incredibly vivid, almost disturbing detail. The gods, who apparently hadn't eaten since the flood started because there were no humans left to make offerings.
They were starving.
They were starving and apparently terrified by the flood they themselves unleashed. They smell the roasting meat from Utnapishtim's sacrifice and they gather like flies around it. It portrays them as desperate, panicked, and not entirely in control. Enlil is furious that someone survived, but Ea basically tells him off for being excessive and to calm things down, and Enlil grants Anapishtim and his wife immortality.
Now, as we discussed, scholars are pretty sure this whole story wasn't originally part of Gilgamesh's adventures.
Yeah, the consensus is very strong. Sinlaki, or perhaps an earlier editor, was interpolating a version of the flood story from a much older, separate Mesopotamian epic.
The Epic of Atrahasis.
Exactly, Atrahasis, which dates to maybe 1635 BCE, so centuries older than the standard Babylonian Gilgamesh. And Atrahasis tells a more complete version of the flood myth.
Including the crucial detail Gilgamesh leaves out, why the gods sent the flood in the first place.
Right. In Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim doesn't give a reason, it just seems like divine whim. But in Atrahasis, the reason is explicit. The gods, particularly Enlil, were being driven mad by the noise of humanity. We were too numerous, too loud, disturbing their divine sleep.
Not exactly a noble reason.
No, it's incredibly arbitrary. And that arbitrary reason is really important for understanding the Mesopotamian worldview. Divine power could be dangerous, unpredictable, and not necessarily concerned with human morality or justice. Sometimes bad things just happen because a god was annoyed.
Okay, so let's revisit that 19th century shock again. The similarities between Utnapishtim's story and Noah's story in Genesis, they were just too close to ignore.
Way too close for coincidence.
Yeah.
The basic plot points the divine warning, the chosen hero, the boat, the saving of family and animals, the birds, landing on a mountain. The parallels are strikingly close. The scholarly view today is pretty settled. The biblical authors were clearly aware of and ultimately draw upon an ancient Mesopotamian tradition about a great flood.
Whether that tradition came directly from Gilgamesh or Atrahasis or maybe some even older common source based on a real flood memory in the Tigris-Euphrates region.
Right. The Genesis story didn't just spring out of nowhere. It's part of that ancient Near Eastern cultural tapestry.
But you stressed earlier that the differences in how the story is used, the theology behind it, are actually far more significant than the plot similarities. Let's unpack that ethical and ideological rewriting.
This is where it gets really interesting. When the Hebrew scribes adapted this ancient flood narrative, they performed a complete theological overhaul, a total pivot. Well, first, theology. Gilgamesh takes place in a polytheistic world with multiple gods who are often panicked, capricious, and internally divided. They argue, they make mistakes.
Right.
Genesis immediately recasts the story within a framework of strict monotheism. There's only one God acting with purpose and control.
And that changes the whole moral reason for the flood.
Fundamentally, in Gilgamesh and Atrahasis, the reason is divine annoyance at noise, or maybe just population control. It's basically the gods being bothered. In Genesis, the flood is presented explicitly as an act of divine justice. God sees the wickedness and sinfulness of humanity and sends the flood as a righteous punishment, saving only the one righteous man, Noah, and his family. It becomes an ethical judgment, not just divine irritation.
The motivation shifts from arbitrary power to moral reckoning.
Exactly. And the resolution is different, too. In Gilgamesh, the hero Utnapishtim gets a very personal reward. Immortality, just for him and his wife. It's an exception, a private deal.
Whereas
Noah receives a communal promise. God makes a covenant not just with Noah, but with all humanity and all living creatures, symbolized by the rainbow. A promise never to destroy the world by flood again. It's about reconciliation and a future relationship between God and creation.
So the same basic story structure
Is meticulously reshaped to teach radically different lessons about the nature of the divine, the cause of suffering, and the basis of morality. It's a masterclass in ideological adaptation.
It's just extraordinary that this text was completely lost to human memory for, nearly 2,000 years, and then it's rediscovered and almost immediately takes its place as this absolute pillar of world literature.
And it wasn't just rediscovered, it was recognized as something that had been foundational even before it vanished. Its influence in the ancient world before it got buried under the sands of time was clearly huge.
How do we know that?
Archaeology tells us. Copies of the epic, or parts of it, sometimes translated or adapted into other languages like Hittite or Hurrian, have been found all across the ancient Near East. We're talking sites in modern-day Israel, Syria, Turkey. It was clearly part of the shared literary and cultural heritage of the entire Fertile Crescent for centuries.
And does that influence stretch even further into, say, ancient Greece?
There's strong scholarly argument for that, yes. Some see Gilgamesh as the clear prototype for later heroes like Heracles, or Hercules in the Roman version.
How so? What are the parallels?
Well, the immense strength, the semi-divine parentage, the undertaking of extraordinary labors or quests, the close companion who sometimes dies tragically. There are definite echoes. But perhaps even more profoundly, scholars point to deep structural parallels between Gilgamesh and Homer's Odyssey.
Really? Between Gilgamesh and Odysseus?
Yeah, suggesting the Odyssey might owe a significant debt to the older Mesopotamian epics framework.
What kind of structural parallels are we talking about?
Things like, the hero suffers a great loss that shapes his journey. Enkidu for Gilgamesh, his comrades for Odysseus. He undertakes a perilous journey beyond the known world. He has a significant encounter involving a descent into the underworld, or at least seeking counsel from the dead, or a supernatural figure who knows about death. He interacts with wise or divine female figures who offer guidance. Siduri for Gilgamesh, Circe, or Calypso for Odysseus. And ultimately, he returns home fundamentally changed by his experiences and suffering. The motif of the hero needing to learn about death from someone who's crossed that boundary is particularly strong in both.
That's fascinating. Okay, let's jump forward to the modern reader. Someone today picking up Gilgamesh. Their experience is going to be hugely shaped by which translation they read, isn't it? Because the text itself is so broken.
That is such an important point. It's not like reading, say, a Dickens novel where the text is fixed. With Gilgamesh, the translator has to make enormous decisions about how to handle the gaps, the broken lines, the ambiguous words. Do you smooth it over to make it read like a seamless story, or do you show the scars?
Give us some examples.
Well, the N.K. Sanders prose version from 1960 is hugely popular, very readable, very accessible. It flows beautifully. But critics sometimes say that by smoothing everything out, it slightly misrepresents the text as an artifact. It hides the fragmentation.
Okay, so that's one approach. What's the opposite?
You have scholars like Stephanie Dalley. Her translations, while also accessible, make a point of emphasizing the fragmentary nature. She uses lots of ellipses, brackets, question marks, and uncertain within the text itself.
So the reader is constantly reminded, this thing is broken, this is reconstructed.
Exactly. You're forced to confront the physical reality of the clay tablets. It's a very different reading experience, more like looking at an archaeological exhibit.
And then there's Andrew George's version, often seen as the standard scholarly benchmark now.
Andrew George's 2-volume edition and his Penguin Classics translation are widely considered the most comprehensive and philologically rigorous. He won awards specifically because his translation tries hard to respect the poetic structure of the original Akkadian, the parallel lines, the couplets, the stanzas.
So it reads more like poetry.
It feels more like the epic poem it originally was. It might be a bit more challenging for a casual reader than Sanders, but it's arguably the closest we can get in English to the literary quality of the original. So yeah, your choice of translation really shapes whether you encounter Gilgamesh primarily as a story, or as a piece of reconstructed history, or as poetry.
Despite all this scholarly attention and its status, why hasn't Gilgamesh quite broken through into mainstream pop culture the way Greek or Norse myths have? We don't see big Hollywood Gilgamesh movies or video games everywhere.
The main reason usually cited is simply timing. It was lost for millennia. During the periods when Greek and Norse mythology were being heavily popularized, the Renaissance art, Victorian literature, early Hollywood films, Gilgamesh was literally buried and forgotten. It just missed that crucial window for becoming part of the foundational pop culture lexicon.
It didn't have centuries of continuous adaptation and retelling like the others.
Exactly. It arrived back on the scene too late, in a sense, to compete for that kind of broad penetration.
But it has found this profound resonance in modern literature, in academia, in more niche cultural spaces. It seems incredibly adaptable.
Oh, absolutely. It's proven to be remarkably capacious, as one scholar put it. Its core themes, friendship, loss, the search for meaning, the relationship with nature, the critique of power, they're so fundamental that they can be readily adapted to explore contemporary issues.
Like what?
Well, Herman Kassack famously used the epic structure as a metaphor for post-war Germany. In his novel The City Beyond the River, exploring ruins and the need for spiritual rebuilding. More recently, you see it being used in discussions around climate change. Gilgamesh's destruction of the cedar forest is seen as an ancient parable of environmental recklessness.
And exploring social issues, too.
Definitely. The intense bond between Gilgamesh and Enkidu speaks to modern discussions of gay rights and deep male relationships. The roles of the powerful female characters like Ishtar, Siduri, and Shamhat lend themselves to feminist readings. The whole tension between civilization and the wild resonates with environmental consciousness. The epic endures because its central human drama is flexible enough to reflect our own changing anxieties and questions back at us. #tag outro.
What an incredible journey we've taken. 4,000 years, distilled into this one epic narrative. Gilgamesh starts as this tyrant, obsessed with fame.
Then gets completely floored by the terror of death after losing his best friend.
And finally emerges, transformed, as this wise ruler who accepts his mortal fate. It's the ultimate arc of wisdom through suffering.
And the entire journey, that whole cycle, is perfectly encapsulated in one single, powerful image that Sinlokyonini uses to frame the entire epic.
The walls of Uruk.
The 12 tablets of the standard Babylonian version literally begin and end at the walls of Uruk.
Right at the beginning, in the prologue, the narrator tells us to behold the walls, but they implicitly represent Gilgamesh's oppressive power, the forced labor, his hubris.
But then, at the very end, after the quest for immortality has failed utterly, Gilgamesh returns. He's empty-handed but reconciled. And he walks up onto those same walls with the boatman Urshanabi. He looks at them again.
And now they mean something completely different to him.
Now they are his magnificent, enduring achievement. They are the proof of human accomplishment, the symbol of the community he leads, the only true immortality he can achieve. They represent legacy. The walls themselves are his victory.
So the final lesson isn't about cheating death, but about redefining what it means to live a meaningful life that transcends death.
That's the hard-won wisdom. Gilgamesh learns that while physical immortality may be unattainable, true transcendence comes through creating a lasting legacy, through contributions to his city, to human civilization. He goes from being a selfish king, driven by personal fear,
to someone who will now endeavor to be a great king, presumably focused on the well-being and endurance of his community. His personal quest failed, but his potential as a ruler, his story, succeeded.
And maybe the most amazing thing is that the story itself proves its own point. The 4,000-year survival of this epic, passed down by scribes like Sinlokyonini, accidentally preserved by fire, painstakingly pieced together by scholars like George Smith, and talked about by us today.
That survival is the ultimate recursive proof of the theme. The text is the enduring legacy.
The Great Wall of Uruk becomes a metaphor for the epic itself, a magnificent human creation built word by word that has endured long after its creators turned back into dust.
So after this deep dive into humanity's oldest surviving meditation on mortality and meaning, we leave you with maybe a challenging final thought.
If our works, our contributions, our legacies are the only real way we can transcend death, what enduring walls are you building in your own life? What legacy are you creating that might echo, even faintly, for 4,000 years?